I can't believe it. Empty streets, cordoned off playgrounds, boarded up shops. You can't even get a coffee around here anymore. I think we've entered a whole new world these past few weeks. We seem to have dipped into a whole new part of the matrix. If anyone had said to you on New Year's Day that this is what your Easter would be like, no school, no work, no church, no socialising, fear, uncertainty, you wouldn't have believed them. And yet here we are. On last Sunday, Christoph left us with the darkness of all the judgment of God falling on the evil and the sin of the world, on Jesus himself. Darkness. But this is a new morning. And for those that were around that very first Easter morning, they also couldn't believe what they were seeing. You see, the tomb that Jesus had been laid in was empty. And the first people on the scene, the woman, his closest friends who came to anoint the body, later the disciples who had run away but were now running to see what was going on, even the Roman soldiers who were posted to guard the tomb, all of them were confused, confounded, astounded at what they had seen. The tomb was empty. They couldn't believe it. One of the arguments that is often put forward against the resurrection is that it was all very well for primitive, uneducated people 2,000 years ago to comfort themselves with some idea of resurrection. But now in our modern scientific world, we know better. And we know that people don't rise from the dead. Well, frankly, that is unhistorical. It shows an extreme ignorance of ancient culture, religion and philosophy. And to be honest, it's a little bit patronising. These witnesses of the first resurrection were no more likely to believe in resurrection than the most hardened of atheists like Richard Dawkins. They weren't stupid. They knew people didn't rise from the dead. And when we meet a couple of them later on, we will see that their first responses were doubt, despair, disbelief. They couldn't believe it. They certainly weren't expecting a resurrection. You see, the Jewish worldview held no place for a concept of resurrection. The Old Testament is very hazy about what happens to the souls of the dead. The details of that, they're never quite clear about that. But one thing is certain, there was no concept of resurrection. And that is why when you think of Mary and the disciples, etc., that first Easter morning, they were utterly confused. Mary was crying. She thought they'd stolen the body. Then after she encountered Jesus and went to tell Peter and John and they ran to the tomb, they couldn't believe it either. They disbelieved Mary's report. And the other disciples, when they heard also, didn't believe. And then we have Thomas. Thomas wasn't there at the gathering where Jesus met the rest of the 12. And he was so sure that it was some sort of spoof that he said that unless he puts his fingers into the place where the nails had gone and puts his hand into the side where the spear had gone, that he wouldn't believe either. Now, I'm very squeamish, but you don't have to be particularly squeamish to think that somebody who goes around volunteering to put their hands into people's wounds is pretty sick in the head. The only way we can understand what Thomas was saying is if we recognize that the only reason he said that was that he believed there was no chance on earth he would ever have to do it. He didn't expect resurrection. Mary didn't expect it. Peter, John didn't expect it. And yet, whenever Jesus came to Thomas, whenever Thomas did the unimaginable, He recognized it was Jesus, and he fell down at his feet. The doubter became a worshipper. Now, I know the church hasn't been great over the centuries at dealing with doubt. Many people have felt unable to express their doubts for various reasons. Maybe you're one of them. Well, take comfort. You're in good company. The Bible is full of people who express their doubts and ask God questions. But there came a time for Thomas to believe. And I've noticed that there's also been a tendency, perhaps, for some people to turn doubt into a virtue, to almost think that there is something wrong with coming to a conclusion or achieving certainty on something. One modern writer said that Jesus didn't love Thomas in spite of his doubts. He loved him because he doubted. He wanted Thomas to doubt. Well, frankly, if somebody doubts my word and questions my integrity, I would hope I would love them in spite of that. I wouldn't be saying, bring it on, I love you because you're doubting me. No, Jesus wanted to bring Thomas further. Robert Louis Stevenson famously said, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. Well, he'd obviously never been on a car with a 5-year-old. You know, are we nearly there yet? No, we journey in order to get to a destination. We bring our doubts in order to achieve a resolution. Just after this Thomas story, just a couple of verses later, John finishes his gospel by saying Jesus did many other things that could have been recorded in this book. But these are written. Why? So that you might travel hopefully? So that you might live with your doubts? No. These are written so that you might believe. So that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and in believing, you might have life in his name. You can't believe it? Neither could they. But there came a time for the doubter to become a worshipper.